Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Um, Good morning. It is week 3, and there we go, get it together. Um, Welcome if it's the first time that you are joining or watching. Welcome to week 3 of journaling. The conversation, right? It's more than just writing, it's a conversation. So, as always, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. All right. So, last week, this is week 3. Okay. Last week, we spoke about intimate conversations. Week 1, we spoke about honesty, right? And that when you are writing and when you're journaling, it is a process where if you're not honest, you're not going to get the fullness of the experience. Then last week I said it was going to be a two-parter, right? So the first part, we spoke about intimate conversations, specifically the output or the pouring out, you as the speaker, right? And having the ability, and God being a God where you could come boldly, you could come honestly, and you can pour out. You never have to think, oh, it's too much or anything. Absolutely not. And so this week we get to do part 2. And I love part 2 because, it's that part of the conversation. And I want you to reflect right now on the last, either the last conversation you had or the last 2 or 3 conversations that I'm talking about, like real conversations, not, hey, how are you? No, real deep conversations with family, friends, loved ones, work colleagues. And I want you to think about your role in the conversation, right? And again, you don't have to share, do not put it in the chat. This is a self reflection. I want you to ask yourself in this conversation, if I were to make a measurement, a percentage, how much of the conversation did I speak? And how much during the conversation did I listen? I'm going to say that again. How much during the conversation did you speak? And how much during the conversation did you listen? And sometimes I'm going to say we because I'm just as guilty. Sometimes we engage in a conversation where the other person, the other individual allows us to kind of pour out and we're able to say our piece. Sometimes it's in a conversation maybe where we won't call it an argument, but we'll call it, a little frustration, right? And they let you just pour out. And then when it's their turn to speak, all of a sudden the cell phone is going off. All of a sudden, we get distracted because we sometimes we even say it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear what you have to say. But when we talk about journaling and we talk about that process, specifically the intimate conversations, well, you can't have a part 1 without a part 2. And so today's part 2 is going to focus on that listening. And so Psalms 46, verse 10, and I don't even think this is the whole verse, but this one part I love where he says, be still and know that I am God. And the part of this short verse is that word still. Because sometimes in a conversation, it's again, we have already discussed in part 1, it is okay. God can handle your output. He can handle what you have to say. But that conversation is a two-way experience. So as much as you were allowed to have your monologue and be dramatic and come boldly and pour out everything that you had and not hold back, it's the same way then you have to know when it's your time to sit down, be still, and know that I am God, and know that God will respond in that conversation, whether or not you want to hear what he has to say, right? And so I like to call this the input, right? And what becomes of your pouring? What becomes of these words? They're not falling on deaf ears. They're not just words that go in a notebook or however you're journaling and just staying there, never to be seen, no. Like there is somebody listening. There is someone who has already answered your prayers. There's someone who has carefully already orchestrated. And in my mind, because I feel as if God has the strangest sense of humor possible. Like I feel like he thinks he's funny, but sometimes I don't think he's that funny. But sometimes he's listening. I believe he's listening, and I'm just pouring out and journaling, and he's sitting wherever he's sitting, like, oh, I already got you. Okay. Oh, but I want to hear from you, but I knew you were gonna say he's listening, right? So, what becomes of your output or your pouring out is the fact that it is a conversation. He is hearing you. And he's also getting ready to give you a response. And so, that input is your understanding that, okay, when I need to be still, I need to be still. Sometimes you might go to journal and you might sit down and there are no words to be said. It doesn't mean that, okay, so let me go ahead and walk away. No, that's a great time to then sit in the stillness of God. It's a great time to sit and ask God, for whatever reason today, we sometimes we call it a writer's block. In the case of journaling, it's not really a writer's block. It's a moment to say, I'm ready to listen. God, what should I be hearing in this moment? What should I get ready to receive from you in this moment? And are you in a position to receive an honest response? See, y'all know, it's early in the morning, so I'm going to be on my best behavior, right? But again, when you go back to reflecting on some of those conversations that you've had with other people, right? And you had that chance to be honest, it's not always the best experience when that person is like, okay, I hear you. I affirm what you have told me, and now I'm going to share my honest response. That's when we start to put up walls, whether or not we realize it. Sometimes we start to put up walls where we're like, okay, I'm going to let you be honest. Hold on, don't don't go too far, right? Or hold on, watch what you're about to say. Mm-mm. God can receive your honesty, but best believe He's going to give it back to you. And you have to ask yourself, am I ready? Am I in a position to receive an honest response? And if you're not in that position, that's okay. That's part of you being honest with yourself in this experience. But then how are you going to get ready so that you can get into that position to receive an honest response? Because the response is there and you finna get it whether you're ready or not, right? So how can you get ready to receive the input? And last but not least, what other voices and opinions are you making privy to your intimate conversations? Now, I don't know if y'all have said it or if you've heard it, where it's like, what happens in this conversation stays right here in this conversation, right? But sometimes I'm not going to say I'm just going to speak for myself, if you would allow me. Sometimes, right, as much as I have these moments in journaling and the output and the input, and I'm having these great conversations and experiences with God, I feel as if, oh, I need to just share this with somebody else, right? And so I'm not saying that there's not always a time where God's like, no, this has now become your testimony. It's now become your reason to shout. It's now become your reason to share. But there are times where God's like, no, 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 this is between you and me. This has nothing to do with anybody else. And so when you start sharing out of turn, when you start taking those intimate conversations to other people, what happens is they start to add their input. And now, when God had 100%, where He was able to pour into you and respond, it's now 50-50, right? Because you now let somebody else enter that intimate space. Or if you let a few other people, it might be like 30-30-30. And so you want to be very careful, because what God knows, of course, we know He knows it all. And so that person who you might share that intimate conversation with does not know the fullness. And if we're honest with ourselves, usually when we tell the story and we talk about the conversation, we're not saying the whole thing. We're not being 100% honest with them. We're going to give them a summation. We're going to give them a summary. And so they know in part, so they can only give you part advice or partial advice, right? But why are you even making other people privy to those intimate conversations when you can go directly to the source, receive 100% of your answer from somebody who knows the fullness of what you poured out? So, once again, part two of the intimate conversation: what becomes of your pouring? Are you in a position to receive an honest response? And if you're not, what are you doing to get ready and get into the position? And what other voices and opinions are you making privy to your intimate conversation? And is it their business? Or does it need to stay between you and God? Amen. So remember, like I always say, journal. Remember, it's that conversation. You might have a schedule where you're like, well, I'm gonna get up early and journal in the morning. I love the morning journaling experience, but sometimes in the middle of the day, you're like, oh, I need to journal. Don't stay stuck on, oh, but I said I was gonna do it in the morning. So go ahead, get your pen and your notebook. If you feel led to journal in the afternoon, journal in the afternoon. If you feel led all of a sudden at night, you're restless and you're like, I don't know what's happening. And this, go ahead, walk to your journal and journal. There is no set schedule that you have to follow. There, type it, handwrite it, voice, video. It's totally up to you. Just remember, be authentic in your experience, and it starts with being honest. It follows up with pouring out fully and completely. And now, after today, we know it also continues with being willing to receive what God has to say. So, today's prayer, I would like for you to read it with me. You could read it out loud or absolutely just listen or follow on the screen. But as you move forward in this process, the prayer that I have today is: God, we thank you for being trustworthy and faithful, but sometimes we struggle, amen, to hear your voice and to see your plan and purpose. Help us to truly trust you. Help us to trust in the process. Give us a willing heart to engage in this conversation as both an honest speaker as well as a humble listener. Allow us to journey through this process with a new level of openness to receive all of what you have to say. Selah and amen.